everyone. Welcome to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name is Betty Guadagno. Today, I'm joined by Darren. We're going to be talking about all things spiritual. And Darren actually really helped me a lot in being able to bring this conception to reality. I have no idea how to do a podcast, no idea how to work Zoom or any of the platforms that we use to record. So Darren was really instrumental in making this all happen. So I'm eternally grateful and welcome to the show.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So you have a podcast of your own, which was something that was really helpful, that you allowed me to sort of come into your world and understand how you work. And I'm wondering if maybe you want to talk a little bit about what your podcast is about.
Sure. My podcast is called the Seeking Eye Live Exploration Podcast. It's based on my Seeking Eye project, which was originally supposed to be just a little local kind of get together for people to talk about life after death and nature of consciousness and things like that, but kind of evolved into an online podcast, which began actually with talking to someone who still is a Reiki practitioner, followed by Reverend Peter Panagore, and it kind of just spiraled on from there to have all these different guests to talk about all their experiences and just the philosophies and sciences surrounding consciousness. So I speak with some of the world's leading researchers on some of these phenomena and some of the world's leading philosophers and thinkers on them as well, just to try and get a variety of different perspectives, not just proponents of survival ideas or spiritual ideas, but also the other side, the skepticism side of things, which I try to be as open as possible to both, to allow the full range of ideas to be displayed. I also do host every now and then a debate between two opposing views, although that's not as often now, because very few people come forward to actually do it in a very respectful way, because I've got a very, very high standards of mutual respect, and it seems that a lot of debaters online just want to create controversy to garner views for their own platform. So not many people actually come forward to have a proper civilized debate, but there are a few good ones on there.
That's awesome. I love that. That's amazing. I'm curious, have you always been a believer in this sort of in the near-death experience, or did you come at it from sort of a skeptical point of view when you started doing research and looking into it?
I was always very much, once you die, that's it, gone. And I saw no reason to believe anything other than the brain creates you, and everything you are is your brain. And once the brain dies, of course, there's nothing left. That's what I was always taught at school. And that's what I always believed. And when I was 12, I had a traumatic experience. It probably doesn't seem that traumatic to most people, but for me, it was. I fainted in a science lesson, and I was always very nervous and very anxious as a kid. And that kind of triggered an anxiety disorder and depression for the next, well, up until my life now. I'm 27 now, so that was 15 years ago. And the anxiety focuses around health, and of course that entails death. And I'm always terrified that I'm about to die for whatever reason, which is frustrating to live with. But it did kind of open the door to the whole question of, well, then I need to know what's gonna happen. And I started looking at it, and of course I came at it with the idea that there's nothing. But once I started looking at the near-death experience, I started thinking, this is a little bit strange, but nothing more that I couldn't attribute to a dying brain or a chemical issue at death. And that continued, but I kept looking at it, and then I found things that wouldn't work for that, such as when people see things that they shouldn't be able to see, and report things accurately, and see things in various different physical locations far away from where their body was at the time. And then from there, it kind of divulged from near-death experiences then to look at mediumship, which I thought was nothing more than just frauds. And it is to a great degree. But when you find the genuine phenomenon that just, again, you shouldn't be able to know things that the mediums tell you, especially when it's information that only you are aware of and never shared. And there's plenty of examples like that anecdotally, but also through experimentation, like through the Wimbridge Institute and things like that. And then, that kind of my interest. I went to a couple of mediums. One of them was terrible, obvious cold reader. One of them was interesting enough to get me a little bit more interested. And from there, it branched off into various different other phenomena, such as remote viewing, out of body exploration, all that sort of thing, various psychic phenomena. And it just kind of comes together into a picture that says that, not necessarily, I don't class it as paranormal, but I would say it suggests that there is a nature of humanity and a form of science that is as of yet undetermined, undiscovered by our current ability to measure.
I love this. I love looking at this from like the analytical, logical mind. For me, it was a lot of the same, like I was a very militant atheist, like I had long philosophical rants about how there was nothing more. And then I had my experience and I was like, oh man, I can't believe that I'm wrong. This is crazy. But I love that you've taken an interest, maybe rooted by something that was harmful, like the anxiety and all of this stuff regarding health. And it's sort of become a passion of yours, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a matter of survival for me, which often makes me wonder, well, I'm clearly coming at this at a biased perspective because I don't want there to be nothing after death. But I think that I've got enough sense around me to be able to see those biases and weed them out. Because certainly for, when you're living with an anxiety disorder, and anxiety disorders are a lot more than people think. Because when you think of anxiety, you think of being scared of everything. And it's much more a physical reaction, because during anxiety, for no reason, your body will flood you with all these stress chemicals and adrenaline. It makes you feel like you're physically about to die. Your heart rate goes up. You feel like you're in a dream world. You feel like you're about to lapse into a coma. You're as crude as it sounds, your bowels absolutely go up the wall, and you really do feel like you're about to die. And for me, that fear, the only way to survive through that was to try and understand what would happen if that inevitable case does arise, so that maybe I wouldn't have to worry so much about it. I still do fear the idea of death because it is still unknown. Mm-hmm. But I certainly now, as a result of the research I did and continuing to do, I now am pretty much convinced that there is at least a lot more to the nature of consciousness than the brain produces it, and once it dies, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. So I'm glad that we're talking about this, because this is like real human stuff, like even though people are interested in the phenomena of near-death experiences, spiritual experiences, like we're humans too, and I think that it's really important for that temperance to have that balance. I'm wondering, have you discovered any sort of spiritual tools, or, just even like regular tools that you use in your life to sort of deal with your anxiety that maybe you might want to share for somebody who's going through the same thing?
Well, I did meditation for a while, just the general kind of watching your breathing. And I followed various guided meditations online. I found some from the Indian gurus to try and follow, all of who charged you a lot of money, unfortunately. But generally, they seem to help every now and then when you were feeling particularly anxious, and you just kind of follow your breath and all that. And that, I wouldn't say it was the tools themselves that have kept me going. It was more that those tools kind of showed you how your mind can be affected by something as simple as breathing, and then finding certain tools that work for you. I mean, I had various cognitive behavioral therapies from different practitioners, all of whom were kind of early 20s, just out of university, knew what they knew from books, but not from experience. and didn't have that kind of background to understand exactly how someone with anxiety and depression actually feels, because they hadn't had the time, which is understandable. And they would give me the standard kind of CBT theory, all of which I knew because I'd researched it all as soon as I started feeling it, because I like to understand things. So I started researching all about anxiety and depression and the mind and cognitive behavioral stuff. So they were telling me things I already knew. And in the end, the only way I could do, I mean, I was pulled out of school in my last year of what we call secondary school. You'd call it high school, which is the exam years. I was pulled out because I was becoming suicidal, with just like feeling like I was going to die every day. It wasn't a good place to live. And I was pulled out of school for that. Ended up having to be home tutored, which took up all of our money. So we were in a pretty dire situation. But I managed to get through it and not take my own life, because of the research I'd done made me think, maybe there must be a point to all this. But also just over the time, going through all the therapies that didn't work, looking at some of these meditations, and I suppose because I was so afraid of death was the only reason I didn't take my own life. I would have done, I think, if I wasn't so afraid of that feeling of because at this time I believed there was nothing, and that fear of not existing kind of kept me. It wasn't necessarily very nice, because I felt trapped. I was very trapped, because what do? Do I take my own life that I know I can't do, or do I continue living feeling deathly ill every day for potentially the rest of my life? It was extremely not a nice place to be. But I had to keep going because I knew I wasn't going to take my own life, so I had no other choice. And once you reach that level of hopelessness, everything that people worry about, that you realize just isn't important. Because, what's important in life is being part of life, being a good human being, helping other people, helping yourself, finding happiness for yourself and others. And it's something that's very experiential, and just it does really wake you up to what is important and what is valuable in life. And over time, just dealing with all this at 16 years of age, I just ended up developing my own strategy over time and experience that help keep me on the straight and narrow, I suppose. And it's not 100% perfect, because I still get periods of anxiety and depression, which is, it's the cycle. That's just how it works. There's nothing much you can do about it. But what you can do is learn to not necessarily fight it, because you won't win. You're fighting against your own physiology. You learn to live in peace with it and recognize it for the illusion that it is. And that's one good thing about the whole spiritual questions, is that you realize that the entirety of life is an illusion. It's a projection of your physiology. The world isn't the world that it is. It's the world that our brains are able to perceive. And there's so much more to it that we don't understand, that, everything that we think is important and necessary to live happily is just very much the epidermis of reality as it is.
Oh yeah, I love this. So as you're talking, what's coming up for me is the gift of desperation, right? Which is the acronym for God. For me, it was the same thing, like different circumstances, but like my life had become so hopeless, and like I had hit this intense bottom in my life. And that's where my transformation took place, because, that's how alchemy works, is like, you have to, I mean, for me anyway, I don't know about everybody else, and I hope not for everybody else. I hope people don't have to get to like the bottom of rock bottom to transform. And I think that's why we come back and we share, like our stories and just our experience as humans. Like, I think that there's so much in just sharing our experiences with one another, because we all have a piece of information that maybe the other one needs, or that another person can find comfort in. So I am so grateful that you're sharing so open and vulnerably, because like for me, that's a superpower for me, like to be able to stand in my authenticity. Like this is where I was, this is where I am now. I'm not perfect by any means, you know, but I'm definitely better than I was. And this is what I did to get there. And I love that I love this conversation so much. And, you know, like something else that I know about you is that you have some passions. You're very creative. I'm wondering how that comes into play in your life, as far as, like, for me, I know that when I am in my creativity, I am kind of distracted from, you know, like my human stuff that's going on, like all of these shadows that want to come out and play. Like when I'm in my creativity, I can really thrive. So I'm wondering if maybe you'll talk a little bit about your creative endeavors.
Well, I seem to be quite a rare person in the sense that I seem to be pretty balanced with left and right brain. I'm very, very analytical, and you know, and to exacerbate that even further, I'm learning how to code at the moment. You know, computer, well, it's smart contract coding for anyone that knows cryptocurrency, and for that you need a very analytical mind to understand how it all works. And of course, with seeking eye and looking at the philosophies and science of consciousness, you need to be analytically minded. But I do also have that creativity side of me, which might run in my family to some degree, but not extremely. So you wonder, is there something kind of that's beyond me that's kind of pushing me in this direction for whatever reason? I don't know, but I seem to be quite good at it. I can play music. I've got you can just see in the corner there, my piano. I've got a few guitars and a banjo, which I never actually touch, but I can kind of play all of those. Not professionally. I never kind of went to lessons. I used to go to lessons to learn the piano, and it just got so boring that I just decided I'll do it on my own. And I'm a lot better now than I ever would have been taking lessons, but just for fun. But the main thing I'm working on at the moment, as you know, is my my fiction book, which is about foxes, because foxes have always been my favorite animal. When I was younger, I used to have a YouTube channel for gaming, which everybody did at my age, at that age, kind of 16, 17. And I never wanted to show my face on camera, and people were always asking me, you need to have a face cam. So I said, right, well, what I'll do is I'll create a character. So I found a little mask. It was just about the time when that Zootopia film was coming out. And of course, the fox in that was all over the internet. So as soon as I looked up, I knew I was going to make a fox, because I've always liked foxes. So I looked up fox masks on Amazon. And of course, that one was the one that came up. So I bought that and used that as a face cam, and I called the character Russet. And I played that for a while, and then I thought this character that I kind of made up would probably be quite a good little book. And I sat on it for a while and didn't really do much with it. And as I always struggle to sleep at night, I always listen to an audio book to help me get to sleep, usually the Harry Potters, because that's the ones we've got. And I just kind of got back into the thought, well, I wonder if I can do that. And I wonder if I can write a book. So I thought, yeah, I'll have a go. Why not? So I've started writing this fiction book now. It's 40,000 words. Yeah, the average kind of debut novel is around 60,000 to maybe 100,000 words. I'm at 40,000 words, and I'm about a quarter of the way through the story. So it's going to be quite a big one. But I've sent it to a couple of friends and a couple of people that I don't really know very well, but who I know read. And the reviews have all come back pretty much astounded that it's my first book, and they said it's going to do really, really, really well. So I'm confident that it will. I'm just going to keep going with that. That's kind of my main creative thing at the moment. Not really inspired by any kind of spiritual stuff. I mean, there will be spiritual aspects to the book, of course, because it's whenever you write anything creative, you generally tend to implement parts of your own life in it. Plus, I think, it'll just make a nice little interesting story to add that sort of thing in. So that's where I am at the moment, creativity wise.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I think that being creative is spiritual, there is this creative action of the spirit, for me anyway. I feel like I'm channeling something when I'm able to be in my creativity. I don't really know what it is. I can't define it, but it feels like something's taking over, So yeah. And I've read some of your book, and it is like so rich with imagery, and I love that in a book. And definitely for like a first novel, it's astounding because it's so detailed.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love that so much. So
did you manage to get to the end of chapter 4? Because that's when it really does take hold of you.
Oh, really? I haven't gotten there yet. I will keep that in mind. That's wonderful. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about how you have done all of this research and, around near-death experiences, spiritual experiences. I'm wondering, have you gone deep into any sort of like paranormal experiences, like going deeper into spirituality, like maybe like UFOs, or you talked about remote viewing?
UFOs, I haven't looked at the research, but I do kind of take an approach to that kind of works for my common sense as for everything. And common sense is a difficult one to talk about because common sense relies on the context you have regarding what you're talking about. If you don't do much research into genuine paranormal phenomenon or, consciousness phenomenon, of course, your common sense is going to be very different. Most people's common sense would dictate, as it did for us for a while, that once you're dead, you're dead. But once you have the context surrounding the research done and the phenomena that exists, then it becomes something very different. But from my perspective on UFOs, to take that as an example, there's pretty much no doubt in my mind that life exists beyond humanity and beyond the Earth. Just the scale of the universe is so vast that it would be virtually statistically impossible that there isn't life somewhere else. However, the distances that one would need to travel and the technology that one would need to develop to traverse the speed of light in order to get from millions of light years away to the Earth would be, as far as physics as we know it, impossible. So I think that, yes, I think that UFOs may be extraterrestrial, to use that word. The vast majority of them are not, of course, but the odd few of them likely are. And I think that some extraterrestrial visitations are possibly accurate. However, I don't think they are extraterrestrial in the sense of coming from other solar systems in other galaxies in space. I think they're interdimensional, because to me it seems far more feasible that if these extraterrestrials are indeed extraterrestrials, that they could utilize some kind of technology to phase between realities in the same physical space. Because, I mean, from our context of spirituality, there does seem to be these other wavelengths that are invisible to our physical life as it is, but that seem to exist and coexist on a different layer of reality to us. And as I say, physics as we currently know it, travel from such distances within this one dimension seems impossible. And yet, traveling between environments would seem a lot more feasible, mainly because we don't understand the nature of those environments. But also that you're occupying the same space. So it's literally just a case of changing your radio from frequency 2.5 to frequency 2.7, and that to me seems much more feasible technology for a more advanced civilization to allow. And I often wonder if these alien visitations aren't spiritual beings from these other dimensions, whether they be humans who have passed on, or again, at this point it is complete speculation because we don't know, we don't understand those environments if they exist. So we can only speculate. You think of folks like David Icke, who talks about reptilians, and at the surface seems crazy, and I don't agree with everything he says, but when he talks about reptilians phasing across dimensions, you start to think, well, that could be feasible because we don't know those environments. We seem to be very confident now that there are these other dimensions from the spiritual perspective that we seem to go to after death. So why not? If people have seen these reptilians or these aliens that seem to appear out of nothing or whatever, then why not? We don't know, but it's certainly something worth considering.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. With the conclusion sort of coming to that it's more than likely interdimensional, more than it could be anything else, and yeah, reality is so big. Once you start looking into this stuff, it's like, it's so expansive, and it can be, there's so many rabbit holes to go down. So like for me, I find that when I start to go down these holes that are like a little bit darker, I try to pull myself out of it because, my thoughts are creating my reality. So if I find one video about like, that there's like evil powers like ruling the universe, then my thoughts will start to create more of that, and I'll find more and more and more things to confirm that reality. So I try to keep myself as spirit centered as I can, and I love diving into the thought of like, interdimensions, and how I also love the idea of infinity and parallel timelines and alternate realities. Like there are an infinite number, like there's an infinite number of me doing all of the things like that I fractured off in different parts in my story. So going on that theme, and because you've done so much research like around spirituality and you've talked to so many experiencers, do you have any thoughts around pre-birth planning?
I think there's enough cases to suggest that pre-planning is something that takes place. Whether that leads to a deterministic kind of philosophy that, well, we've planned everything, so everything is planned and that everything will happen, I think is an error. Because it would seem from the various experiences that people report, and this is, you could argue, is anecdotal, but I think there's enough cases and enough literature now to class them more as case studies as opposed to anecdotes, because a lot of these anecdotes also include veridical aspects where they see objective things that can be reported back, which kind of suggests that, well, if this is verifiable and this is objectively shown to be true, then why can't the rest of the experience? It may not be, but take it for granted in this case that it is. I think it's an error to say that everything is predetermined just because we planned it before birth, because there is still that aspect of free will. We seem to be able to plan generally our lives. We can go back to my book as an example. I've got on my little pad, I've got the outline for every chapter that I wrote at the beginning, as I was very early on to plan, right, this chapter's going to do this, this is going to do this, this is what's going to happen at the end. Then I start writing it, and it's all gone completely out the window. So that pad's now useless because I've got no idea what's going to happen. And although it does follow the same kind of general structure, it's just very different to what I originally planned. And I think it's quite similar to life. We do have challenges that we are inevitably going to face, but how we face them and how we interpret them and what we do with the knowledge we've gained through facing them is not necessarily what we would have envisaged during our early life or our pre-life planning stage. So we may plan the events, but we don't plan our reaction to them or the effects they have and which direction that then takes us. So I think, yeah, pre-birth planning does seem to take place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our lives are completely determined from start to finish.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that you used your book as an example, because that's kind of what it feels like, with the concept of pre-birth planning. From my own experience being shown my pre-birth plan, like the bones of the story are set, but like anything can take place inside of those plot points. So I love that you used your own book as an example for that, because yeah, that's really what it feels like. It feels like chapter outlines. And like in my life, I feel like I've gone back chapters. I'm like, you know what? No, let me just like travel back here and, make a big giant loop and a U-turn. And so I love that. So yeah, I'm just thinking sort of about like all mystical experiences. I love the way that your mind works. I want to get your take on them. So as far as like soulmates, or have you heard about the concept of twin flames? Do you have any sort of conception around that, or around like, from what I understand about twin flames is that it's one soul in two bodies, the feminine and masculine energy. So I'm wondering if you have any sort of thoughts around that.
I mean, with that sort of thing, we really don't know, because it's, first of all, to talk about souls splitting into two lifetimes, you're talking about, first and foremost, the concept of soul, something that we don't have the science to research or to understand. So we're going to be completely speculating based on what people have reported. I can very easily envisage a concept of soulmates, of souls who repeatedly incarnate together into lifetimes, whether it be human, whether it be Earth or wherever else. If I have a soulmate, it will be my mum, because we're not just mum and son. We're a lot more than that. Best friends is an understatement. And even my late dog who passed would be one of my soulmates, and definitely one of my mum's soulmates, because just the connection is far deeper there than any other connection between anybody that we've ever known. Um, I know Michael Newton in his books, Life, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls. In fact, Journey of Souls first, then Destiny of Souls, talked a lot about soulmates and soul groups and soul families. So that's one to look at. What he talks about generally is that everybody who incarnates has a soul family, which is a group of souls who incarnate together frequently throughout lives in different roles. So it might be mother and son, it might be father and brother, it might be dog and owner, you know. The only thing I'd say about Michael Newton's books is be very, very careful, because when you get into the realms of hypnotherapy, which it focuses on, you open the door to suggestion from the hypnotherapist and leading questions and things like that. So it's not necessarily the most reliable source of information for these sort of things. But it's certainly interesting, the consistency between all the cases that he mentions. If you want to look at this sort of thing, I'd more recommend Robert Monroe's books, Journeys Out of the Body and etc., because he did these out-of-body explorations naturally and kind of investigated these environments himself, as opposed to doing it through hypnotic suggestion, which could subconsciously inject your own beliefs into the experience, so to speak.
Wow, that's really interesting. And another person who writes really amazing literature around pre-birth planning is Robert Schwartz. And in his book, Your Soul's Gift, he has a whole chapter on pets, about like if we choose the pets that we come into form with. So I love that you shared about that. And yeah, you know, some of that literature, you know, like Michael Newton and Robert Schwartz specifically, gives a lot of comfort, you know, to know that like I'm not a victim to my circumstance. Things are planned and there's an outline and I don't really have to worry too much. And that's what I think that they're trying to accomplish with that literature. That's what they accomplished in my life anyway. And so I'm really grateful for that. Have you ever attempted doing hypnotherapy for yourself or any sort of like past life regression? Do you feel like you've been on Earth before? That was a lot of questions all at once. Take your time.
I've been to a single hypnotherapy session for anxiety. It's, for anyone that hasn't done hypnotherapy, it's effectively meditation with guided imagery, effectively, which puts you into this relaxed state. And that was the only time I'd done it professionally. I didn't really notice much difference, but I'd only been once. It's generally something you need to repeat and practice to get the benefits of. I did buy Robert Monroe's, talking about Robert Monroe, his it's called HemiSync CDs, which are designed to get you into a state where you can initialize an out-of-body experience yourself and just go and explore these realms or these states of mind, which is a form of hypnotherapy based on what's called hemispherical synchronization technology. And it's basically, if you know what binaural beats are, in one ear it plays a tone, in the other ear it plays another tone of a slightly different hertz value, so slightly higher or lower tone, and your brain effectively synthesizes the difference between the two tones in such a way that it connects, whatever that means, the right and left hemisphere, so they work in synchronization, which allows you to enter these higher states. But effectively it is a matter of hypnotherapy as well, because you also then have to undergo certain visualization techniques and methods to get yourself into these various different mind states, which should allow for out-of-body experiences. And I've done a few of those, but I just haven't had time to sit down and do the whole thing. And there have been some strange experiences I've had. So, for example, I was lying there with my eyes closed, trying to imagine my body coming out and separating from my physical body, and the blackness, I suppose, when you close your eyes, became very light grey for no reason, and that's as far as it got. So I can't really talk about what happens after that, but that's as far as it got from my experience. So that is effectively my experience with hypnotherapy. What was your other question?
I was asking about past lives. Do you think that you've been
lives.
on Earth before?
I don't know. I think the only pointer that I would have to say that I may have been is my interests. and my general kind of level of maturity compared to other people of my age. Because a lot of people have said that I have always been kind of wise beyond me years, as they say. And several people have said you've been here many times before. So that could be the case. I generally attribute my kind of my maturity in my life view down to the depression. As I say, when you get to that stage of the depression, you're forced to grow up to survive. You're forced to realize what's important, what isn't, what's valuable, what isn't, and what's worth worrying about and what isn't. But certainly I think that past lives are a thing through looking at Ian Stevenson's work on reincarnation, and Jim Tucker's more recently, as well as Jim Matlock, who I've had on my podcast to talk about this stuff. There are very interesting cases of unknown people who have had past lives as unknown people who have come back and have said, here are, for example, there's a guy called Marty Martin who was an extra in Hollywood movies, never credited. No one ever knew really who he was. And a guy who exists now, I think he's still around. I think he was a boy when he mentioned it, so he must still be around. Came and said, I was this guy, Marty Martin, or I don't think he named him, but he said, I was this guy. They found who he was later. And he listed off 50 facts about this guy that were correct, as well as some facts that weren't accurate. But I think it was either 50 that were correct, or it was 50 in total, the vast majority of which were correct. But I think it was 50 in total that were correct. And it was weird, unguessable things like my sister had a dog called whatever, and I drove a red BMW or something like that. And it was very generally unguessable things that were very individual to each person. And as I say, 50 of them spot on. And they were able to go back and find this guy based on the descriptions, and again found that everything that the kid had said, or the vast majority of what the kid had said, was completely accurate. And that's I think one of the strongest cases. You also have, of course, the James Leininger case, which I won't go into, but that's also very strong. You can find that online anywhere. Been contested recently, but there's a back and forth between the researchers and the skeptics. So I think among many others, there is a strong enough case to suggest that past lives may indeed be a part of reality.
Yeah, I think with that case with the kid that you're talking about, with this Marty Martin, the child who had said all of this, I think he was like 8 years old when people finally started listening to him, and then they found the family, and he was like 15 when that happened, the kid was. And by then, a lot of it had disappeared, he wasn't as connected to the life because he had been, programmed into this life. Yeah, that is amazing when that happens and it's documented. And yeah, it's in the Surviving Death docuseries on Netflix. That particular story is, along with another really amazing one about reincarnation as well. Yeah, that's a topic that definitely fascinates me. And I love that you said that the things that you're interested in, like I feel the same way. Like, why do I have such an affinity towards Egypt, or like whatever my interests are that pique me so much? I feel like it must be something that my spirit is carrying with me from lifetime to lifetime. So,
but of course, you must be careful in the sense that although you may have interest in some unusual things, not every interest you have is related to a past life. And a lot of people seem to be, once they believe in a certain phenomenon, they seem to go all in and kind of lose track of what common sense says. Well, yes, this could be related to a past life. This could be related to an after-death communication, but it might also not be. For example, there's a phenomenon called pareidolia that I see a lot on the forums online, on Facebooks and Twitters, and it's people who post a picture of some random scene, a tree or something, and they say, "Look, my dog came back to visit me in this picture in the clouds," and you look and there's nothing there, and you can't obviously say that you're seeing things effectively, because obviously in a grief-stricken mind, you're desperate looking for everything you can, but the mind is very, very good at tricking you into seeing things that aren't there when you want them to be there. And there are, of course, genuine deathbed visions and genuine after-death communication. I've had them, my dad's had them, who he never believed in any of this nonsense up until a month ago when weird stuff started happening to him. So genuine after-death communications do happen and genuine signs do happen, but when we try and see it in everything, then we start to kind of fool ourselves, I suppose. So it's a very easy trap to get into. It's just one that you've got to be careful with.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm as cautious with that, because it makes my experience a lighter one, a better one. Like for me, this is just my personal experience. But when I see spirit in everything, it makes me feel so supported. And, like I can lean on that. I can fall back on the knowledge that I am divinely guided every step of the way. And so that's just something that's happened to me in the last couple of years, that, and also I think with something like that, with like being able to see something in a picture that nobody else can see, sometimes I feel like, like spirit can, we're seeing things through our own eyes. Like, I don't know if you see the color red the same way that I see the color red. You know what I mean? That's perception. So I think that for me, like spirit can sometimes put like a sheet over my eyes and I can see things a certain way that maybe somebody else doesn't, But for me, it's finding the temperance of like, how do I balance that with actually being on earth and being a human and being part of a society that doesn't see through spirit lens all the time.
Yeah. And that makes sense. But for me, that kind of view that every sign that someone gets may indeed be spirit working through them, that wouldn't work for my lifestyle, because for me, that would be, well, then I can use that explanation for everything, and we'd never be able to determine what is an actual experience and what is not, because certainly it's almost certain that a lot of these experiences aren't synchronicities or whatever, and some are just coincidence. And I think if you have that view that everything, we could say that everything is spirit, I think for me would be unhelpful, because then I could just it becomes unfalsifiable. You can't then determine which are genuine and which may not be, and differentiate between them. But that's just differences in how we look at things. There's no right or wrong way of doing it.
I think that's kind of the thing about just being part of the human experience, like being part of what we're doing here, is that everybody sees things through different lenses. You're right. There is no right. There is no wrong. I don't believe that there is. There's just more and more experience. And, like from a spiritual perspective, like the spiritual laws of the universe, like the spirit, there's universal laws that say that we are one, like the law of oneness and, connectedness, interconnectedness. And so somebody has a different opinion than me. It's just another piece of me, and that's what I feel like the universe wants to experience. It wants to experience all these different things, before it comes into whatever happens, whatever happens from here, But yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for helping me put this together. And thank you for coming and being so vulnerable. And we're definitely going to put links to your podcast and how to get a hold of you. And yeah, I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and have a chat with me today.
Great. No worries. Yeah, I'm glad the podcast is going well. I hope it keeps going strong for you.
Thanks so much. All right. We'll see you next time. Be wavy.
Bye-bye.